Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're going to take a closer look at Lockheed Martin. We've got a whole bunch of sources here, like their company history, articles about their impact, and even stuff on how they've shaped pop culture.
Yeah, I mean, it's a company that's pretty much become a household name when you talk about things like defense systems or space exploration. But I guess any company with that much influence is bound to attract some controversy too, right?
That's true. So, Lockheed Martin, they've been around for a while, haven't they?
Oh, yeah, definitely not a newbie in the field. A lot of people don't realize this, but the Lockheed Martin we know now actually started back in 1995 when Lockheed Corporation and Martin Marietta merged.
Interesting. So, we're talking about two big names in aviation and aerospace joining forces.
Exactly. And that merger was a real turning point. It created this powerhouse that's been leading the way in pushing the limits of technology, especially in aviation.
Okay, so let's talk about that aviation legacy because it's pretty impressive. Even the name Skunk Works sounds kind of mysterious and cool. Right. They've been behind some of the most legendary aircraft in history.
Mhm.
Like during World War II, the P-38 Lightning was a total game changer. With that unique twin boom design and powerful engines, it was a major force in the air.
It wasn't just about looks, though, right? I mean, it really made a difference in the war.
Absolutely. The P-38 gave Allied pilots a huge advantage in terms of speed, how far it could fly, and its firepower. They used it for all sorts of missions, like escorting bombers, ground attacks, and even reconnaissance. It was really versatile.
So they made their mark in World War II. What came after that?
Well, then you have the Cold War.
Yeah.
And they developed the SR-71 Blackbird, which, believe it or not, still holds the record for the fastest manned aircraft ever.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about just slightly faster. This thing could actually outrun missiles.
You know what? I actually remember seeing this documentary about the Blackbird. It was amazing, the technology they were using way back then to be able to fly that fast and at those crazy altitudes.
Yeah.
It was like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It's wild how long that record has stood. It really shows how innovative the Skunk Works team was.
So World War II, Cold War,
Ah.
clearly not a one-hit wonder. How about more recently? What have they been up to?
More recently, you've got the F-22 Raptor and the F-35 Lightning II. They're icons when it comes to stealth technology and air superiority. Fifth-generation fighters, they're used by both the U.S. and allied forces around the world. The F-22 and F-35 represent a whole new level of capability. You're talking about stealth, sensor fusion, and just overall combat effectiveness.
Hold on a sec. Sensor fusion. I feel like that's a term we hear all the time, but what does it actually mean for a pilot, say, in the middle of combat?
It's almost like having superhuman senses. Imagine a pilot who can see everything around them, 360 degrees, even through clouds or at night. All the data from radar, infrared sensors, electronic warfare systems, it all comes together and is displayed right on their helmet visor. It's like this insane level of situational awareness that you couldn't even imagine a few decades ago.
So it's not just about being invisible to the enemy. It's about having this incredible awareness of everything that's going on around you, which I guess is a huge advantage if you're in a dogfight.
Exactly. And that's one of the big reasons why so many countries want the F-35. It gives them a real edge in modern warfare. But of course, that level of sophistication comes with a pretty hefty price tag.
Right, of course. We've been focusing a lot on their aviation achievements, but Lockheed Martin does more than just fighter jets, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's way bigger than that. I mean,
Right.
their work goes far beyond Earth. They've had a big part in space exploration, working with NASA on stuff like the Orion spacecraft. That's designed to take us back to the moon and eventually to Mars.
So when we talk about them pushing boundaries, it's not just about speed or stealth. It's about literally pushing the boundaries of what humans can explore.
Yeah, exactly. And aside from those big headline-grabbing missions, they also build the satellites that we depend on for communication, GPS, and even keeping an eye on the climate. So they're not just about weapons. They're also about understanding our planet and the universe.
Okay, so aviation, space, they're clearly a major player. But just how big are we talking?
Think massive, over 110,000 employees worldwide. And a lot of them are top engineers and scientists. Plus, they're the biggest contractor for the U.S. Department of Defense.
Yeah, that's a lot of people. And being the top contractor for the Department of Defense, I mean, that must mean they're involved in a ton of projects, right?
Oh, yeah. You're talking about missile defense systems like IAD, space-based surveillance, the whole nine yards. Their technology is basically shaping how wars are fought, how we explore space, and even how we understand our own planet. And it's not just the U.S. either. Their influence reaches over 70 countries around the world. They've got key partnerships in Europe, the Middle East, and the Asia-Pacific region.
So it's a company that's woven into the global fabric of defense and technology. It's almost hard to grasp the scale of it all.
It really is. And that scale means things get complicated in good ways and bad. We've talked about their amazing innovations, but there's also a flip side. There's controversy, criticism, and ethical questions that we should talk about too.
Right, you can't talk about a company like Lockheed Martin without addressing the elephant in the room, right? So let's get into those controversies. What are some of the main concerns that come up in the research?
Well, three main areas keep popping up. Cost overruns, especially with that F-35 program. Then there's the ethics of the weapons they develop and sell. And finally, how much their lobbying efforts influence government decisions.
Okay, let's start with the F-35. I've heard it called the most expensive military project ever, and our sources definitely don't shy away from the criticisms.
It's true, the F-35 program has had its share of problems. Delays, glitches, and yeah, those massive budget overruns. We're talking about a program that's estimated to cost over $1.7 trillion over its lifetime. That's a mind-boggling amount of money, even for a government project.
What are the critics saying exactly? Why has this program become such a target for controversy?
Some people argue that the program's goals were just too ambitious, that the tech was too complicated to develop on time and within budget. Others say there was a lack of oversight and accountability, suggesting that the program got so big it was basically too big to fail, and that contractors like Lockheed Martin may have taken advantage of that.
So it's like they tried to build this ultimate do-everything fighter jet and ended up creating a logistical and financial nightmare in the process.
That's one way to look at it. But, there are also people who strongly support the F-35. They point to its advanced capabilities, how versatile it is, and its importance in maintaining air superiority for the U.S. and its allies. Their argument is that the long-term benefits outweigh those initial costs.
So it's a complicated issue with valid points on both sides.
Absolutely. It really highlights the tough choices that governments and defense contractors have to make when it comes to developing and using advanced weapons.
You should definitely circle back to the F-35 later and really dig into those arguments. But for now, let's move on to the other controversies.
Right. So apart from the cost overruns, there are serious ethical questions about the types of weapons that Lockheed Martin makes and sells.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, one that comes up a lot is cluster munitions. These things scatter hundreds of bomblets over a huge area. And a lot of those bomblets don't explode right away. They can stay hidden for years and end up hurting civilians long after a conflict is over.
I remember reading about those. I think over 100 countries have banned them because they're so dangerous to civilians.
You're right. And that brings up the question, should a company like Lockheed Martin that says it's a responsible global citizen be involved in making and selling weapons like that?
That's a tough one. I mean, they're a defense contractor, so they're fulfilling government contracts, but they do get to choose what they develop and sell, right?
It's a really tricky ethical situation, and there's no easy answer. There are strong opinions on both sides, but it's a conversation that needs to happen.
Okay, so we've got the cost overruns and ethically questionable weapons. Two strikes. What's the third area of concern?
The third one is about the impact of lobbying and campaign contributions on how governments make decisions. Lockheed Martin, like a lot of big defense contractors, spends millions of dollars every year on lobbying in Washington.
And the concern is that all that lobbying gives them too much power over defense policies and how much money is spent, right?
Right. Critics say that this creates a conflict of interest. The government might be more likely to approve expensive weapon systems, even if they're not the best or most needed, just because of the pressure from powerful lobbyists.
So basically, there's a chance that decisions are being made to benefit corporate profits instead of actually improving national security.
That's the worry. And it's made worse by accusations of overcharging and conflicts of interest in the defense industry in the past.
So even though Lockheed Martin has achieved some incredible things in technology, it seems like they're also caught up in some pretty complex ethical and financial issues. It's a lot to unpack. We've already talked about their history in aviation, their role in space exploration, and now these controversies about costs, weapons, and lobbying.
Yeah, and honestly, we've barely scratched the surface. But I do think it's important to take a step back here and think about what we've learned. Lockheed Martin is definitely a company with a ton of power and influence. They're shaping how defense works, how we explore space, and technology in general. But they're also facing some serious questions about their place in the world and the consequences of what they do.
It's a company working in a world that's changing incredibly fast.
That's for sure. We're entering a whole new era of threats and challenges. Things like hypersonic weapons, cyber warfare, and even the growing militarization of space. And Lockheed Martin is right in the thick of it all.
So what does the future hold for them? What are the challenges and opportunities they'll have to face? And how will they handle these increasingly complicated ethical and geopolitical situations? Well, those are all questions we'll dive into right after this. All right, we're back. And before the break, we were talking about what's next for Lockheed Martin. After going through all this research, what really struck me is just how fast technology is changing in the defense industry.
It's mind-blowing, right? It really feels like we're on the edge of a whole new kind of warfare, one that's all about technologies that seemed impossible not that long ago. Like take hypersonic weapons, for example. They're a total game changer.
I think I saw a headline about those just the other day, something about a missile that can travel at like 5 times the speed of sound. It's kind of hard to even imagine.
Yeah, these weapons can travel at Mach 5. Think about it this way. A hypersonic missile could fly across the entire U.S. in less than an hour. That's crazy fast. And with current defense systems, it's super hard to even detect them, let alone stop them.
It's kind of scary when you think about it. And I know this is one area where the U.S. is in a straight-up competition with China and Russia. It feels like a whole new kind of arms race, but with even more dangerous and unpredictable technology.
It's a huge concern for global security, that's for sure. There's so much potential for things to escalate quickly. And it's not just about speed. These weapons are also really good at maneuvering, which makes them even tougher to track and defend against.
So how do you even prepare for something like that? I mean, a threat that moves that fast and is basically invisible, what do you even DO?
It means we need to completely rethink our defense strategies. The old school radar and missile defense systems, they just can't handle hypersonic threats. There's a lot of research happening right now looking into new sensors, super advanced algorithms, and even things like directed energy weapons.
So it sounds like we're kind of scrambling to catch up, trying to come up with defenses for a technology that's already out there. Plus, there's the whole AI thing, too. Now it's not just about speed, it's about machines making decisions in a split second.
You're right, that's another huge factor. Lockheed Martin and a lot of other big defense contractors, they're putting a ton of money into AI and autonomous systems. You're talking about drones, unmanned vehicles, even AI-powered systems that can analyze info and react way faster than any human could.
Yeah, I get why that's appealing from a military point of view, right? Speed, precision, maybe fewer casualties on your side. But doesn't that raise some serious ethical questions? Like, are we really okay with machines making decisions about who lives or dies on a battlefield?
It's a huge debate right now. People are talking about it everywhere, think tanks, universities, governments all over the world. There's a lot of worry about unintended consequences, about bias in the algorithms, and about humans losing control over war.
It's like opening Pandora's box, right? Once you do it, you can't just close it back up.
Exactly. And the stakes are unbelievably high. We're talking about the future of warfare, the potential for massive global conflicts, and what it even means for humans to make decisions in life or death situations.
So we've got hypersonic weapons, AI-driven warfare. It's a lot to process. But there's another big piece of this puzzle that we need to talk about, and that's what's happening in space.
Yeah, space is becoming more and more militarized. It's not just about scientific exploration or communication satellites anymore. We're seeing weapons systems being developed that are specifically designed for space, anti-satellite technology, and just this overall competition to control this new strategic area.
And it's not just governments involved anymore, right? You've got private companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin. They're launching rockets, putting up satellites, and they're basically changing the whole way we think about space exploration.
It's completely changing the game. For decades, Lockheed Martin was like the go-to partner for NASA and other government agencies when it came to space. But now they've got competition from these smaller, faster companies that can often do things cheaper and quicker.
It sounds like the Wild West out there. So how is Lockheed Martin handling all of this change?
They're having to learn to be faster, more innovative, and more willing to collaborate. Sometimes they partner with these private companies, sometimes they buy up smaller startups, and they're also putting a lot of money into R&D to make sure they stay ahead of the curve. Plus, they're not just sticking to the same old defense contracts, they're looking into commercial opportunities too, like space tourism, satellite internet, even asteroid mining.
Okay, I'm seeing a theme here. Hypersonics, AI, the new space race. It seems like Lockheed Martin has to be constantly adapting and evolving just to keep up with how fast everything is changing.
That's a really good observation. And it brings up a big question. How do you balance a history of innovation and expertise with the need to be flexible and quick on your feet in a world that's constantly shifting.
It's kind of like they're this giant aircraft carrier trying to make a sharp turn in a narrow channel. It takes a lot of time and precision, and there's a lot of risk involved. But if they don't change, they'll end up running aground.
That's a perfect analogy. And it shows how much pressure Lockheed Martin and the whole defense industry is under right now. The choices they make now, the things they decide to invest in, those are going to determine whether they succeed or fail in the years to come.
So we've talked about the past, we've got a glimpse of the future, but I'm still wondering, what does it all mean? What are the real-world effects of all these advancements, all these strategic shifts, all these ethical dilemmas?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I don't think there's an easy answer, but I do think there are some important things to take away from all this.
Okay, I'm listening. What are the big takeaways, the big picture stuff?
Well, first, we've got to realize that the lines between defense, space, and technology are getting blurrier and blurrier. What happens in one of those areas definitely affects the others. Second, the speed of innovation is just getting faster and faster, and that creates both huge opportunities and huge challenges for companies like Lockheed Martin. And finally, the ethical issues around these technologies are becoming more and more complex and urgent.
That's a lot to think about, but I think you're right. It's not just about the cool technology itself anymore. It's about how it affects people, how it changes the balance of power in the world, and the choices we make as a society about how these technologies are developed and used.
Exactly. And those choices are ultimately up to us. We need to be informed, we need to talk about these things, and we need to hold our leaders accountable for the decisions they make, especially when it comes to the companies they work with.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. From Lockheed's history with airplanes to their role in the new space race, and of course, all the controversy and ethical questions that come with that kind of power and influence. It's been fascinating so far, but we're not quite done yet. There's one more important part of Lockheed Martin's story that we need to look at, and that's the impact they have on people's lives.
You're right, we can't forget about the human side of this. Lockheed Martin isn't just some big, abstract company. It's made up of thousands of individuals. Engineers, scientists, technicians, and all kinds of people who are working on these incredibly complex and challenging problems. And their work has the potential to not only shape the future of defense and space, but also to make people's lives better in real, tangible ways.
And we're going to explore those human stories, those real-world impacts right after this. We're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into Lockheed Martin. It's been a wild ride so far. We've talked about their cutting-edge tech, their global reach, the controversies, and all the challenges they're facing in this fast-changing world. But before we go, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the human element.
It's true. It's easy to get caught up in all the talk about hypersonic weapons and these billion-dollar deals and forget that Lockheed Martin is made up of people. A lot of incredibly talented people who are pushing the boundaries of what's even possible.
Totally. And I'm curious, what are some ways that Lockheed Martin's work is actually making a positive impact on people's lives? I mean, they're involved in more than just building weapons, right?
Oh, absolutely. Their tech is used in all sorts of fields, from healthcare to disaster relief to even environmental monitoring. For example, they've developed these really advanced imaging systems that are used in hospitals. They help doctors detect and diagnose diseases earlier and more accurately.
So it's not just about making things that go boom.
Nope, not at all. They're also building satellites that are used to track weather patterns, see how much deforestation is happening, and provide early warning systems for natural disasters. That data is super important for scientists, governments, and aid groups who are trying to protect people and the planet.
It's like there are two sides to this coin, right? On one side, you have the defense contractor building weapons and playing a role in the global power struggle. But on the other side, there's this company using its tech to tackle some of the world's biggest problems.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that duality? And you see it reflected in the lives of the people who work there, too. You might have an engineer who's designing a missile defense system one day, and then the next day, they're working on a project to develop clean energy.
That's a really good point. It's not always this black and white, good versus bad, military versus civilian thing. A lot of these technologies can be used in many different ways. It really comes down to the choices that are made, both by the company and by us as a society.
It's a shared responsibility, for sure. And it's a conversation we need to keep having. Everywhere, in boardrooms, in classrooms, even around the dinner table.
Well said. You know, we've only scratched the surface when it comes to this complex company. But I think the main takeaway for me is that Lockheed Martin is much more than just a name on a fighter jet or a headline about some controversial weapons program.
They're a perfect example of the challenges and opportunities we're all facing in this era of rapid technological change. They reflect our hopes, our fears, and our constant struggle to find a balance between pushing the limits of innovation and acting responsibly.
And their story, just like the story of technology itself, is still unfolding. It's up to all of us to stay informed, to participate in these important discussions, and to make our voices heard as we navigate this future that's full of both uncertainty and exciting possibilities.
Absolutely. It's a future where the choices we make today will have a huge impact for generations to come.
That's a great point to end on. Well, folks, it's time for us to come back down to earth from this deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of the world of Lockheed Martin. I hope you learned something new and, maybe, even more importantly, that you're inspired to keep asking the tough questions and to be part of those crucial conversations that will shape our future together.